This is the first episode in a new series called Let's Play, where I am going to, you guessed it, play with LUTs. In this episode, we're going to be looking at 7 free LUTs, and we're going to see how I use them, what I would use them for, what kind of strength I'm going to use them at, and etc, etc. I'm not a colorist. I'm barely learning things like the flesh line on the vector scope and the waveforms and the RGB parade and those things, so this is kind of a learning experience for me, and it's gonna be a real world use of these LUTs to see if I would use them and how I would tweak them in a quick turnaround situation. So this first LUT is from let's see. This first LUT is from Juan Malara. So this one is Fuji 3510. I'm not really familiar with film stocks, but I guess this is emulating Fuji 3510. So let's turn that LUT on. Oh, and before I start, let me show you. I really botched the white balance and the exposure on the shot because it was golden hour and the light was changing really fast. So this is what it looked like before. If I can get this to turn off. Oh shit. Okay, there you go. This is what it looked like before. Really blue, really bad. And let's turn that back on. If you'll turn on, come on now. I think this might be a little bit too... Yeah, there we go. Okay. There we go. Now it's back to corrected, and I also did some skin tones to fix up the skin tones over here. But let's see that Fuji 3510. Oh, right off the bat, it's really punchy, really contrasty. It really bumps up the highlights. Yeah, it really bumps up the highlights and drops the shadows a bit. Not crushing them, but bringing them down a tiny bit. You can see it right here in the waveforms. The highlights go up. We have some clipping up here. Shadows don't actually clip, so that's kind of nice. Might be a way that I shot it that didn't let it crush them. But let's see. You never really use a LUT full power. So let's take this down a bit, see where it would look a little bit more natural. Oh crap, am I on the wrong one? Oh, I am on the wrong one. Whoops. Let's go to Fuji 3510. There we go. So let's turn that down a bit. Yeah, it's getting a little bit more usable, I would say. Let's see before and after again. Now we're at about 50% power. Yeah, there we go. It's adding a lot of contrast. It's adding some... I actually kind of really like the colors on here. It makes it look more filmic. I'm guessing that's what the Fuji 3510 looks like, the film stock. Maybe not, maybe it's just the color scheme, but it looks really nice. I really like that it brings some bluish greens into the shadows, midtones over here in the background. Okay, so I really like that it adds the bluish green to the midtones, the shadows over here. I would say those are kind of midtones, a little bit leaning towards the shadows. And if you look at the highlights here, it makes them pop a bit. You can see over here in, well, this is the sky, so of course it would bring it up a lot. Let's see if we can find her face. This is my girlfriend. I think this is her face over here, right here. So let's see how that brings it up. Yeah, it definitely brings up the highlights a bit. I'm not too much of a fan of that, but I really like what's doing with the colors here. It's adding a nice bluish, greenish tinge to the whole thing. And yeah, it looks really retro, vintage, something that a lot of people like. Multiple interruptions and now it's much later. So I think we were on 3513. So I'm just going to start from 3513. So 3513 looks almost exactly like 3510. If you look at the waveforms, I think it raises the highlights a little bit more, but I couldn't really tell. I could only tell because of these highlights. You can see that, well, if this goes back to 100%. The highlights over here, oh, I'm pointing with my finger. Over here, the highlights in the background, the skyline and the mountains over here. Keep an eye on these highlights in the waveforms. When I turn it on, all of those highlights just start clipping. So some of them are not quite clipping, but you can tell that there's some lost detail here. You can't see this mountain form anymore that you could see earlier. Maybe it's a little bit there. It's kind of nice because it looks like it has a nice highlight roll off, but these aren't really clipping except for maybe over here. Well, anyways, like before, I never use a LUT full power, typically. So let's make this like 50, 60, around there. And you can see it brings up the highlights. You can see in my dog right here, the highlights are a little bit blown out. But it does add a nice, like 3510, it adds a nice blue-green kind of look to the midtones. Or maybe the shadows? Yeah, the shadows and the midtones. Adds a nice contrast to it. I prefer a flatter look, so it's not really for me, but sometimes I do like having these film emulations, and I actually kind of like this one, and I might use this one next time I do a lookbook like this one. I do have a few more planned. So now let's go to Kodak 2383. Ooh, that's a lot warmer. Let's go to there. And let's bring it down again to like 50. Okay, so right off the bat you can tell it's a little bit warmer than these ones. So this one has like a bluish greenish to the midtones. This one's adding a little bit of warmth. A little bit of warmth and contrast. So we'll see. You can definitely tell in the skin tones. The skin tones are a little bit warmer than this one. They seem a little bit paler, more zombie-ish. They look a little bit warmer here, if you can see it. And again, it doesn't really bring up the highlights too much like in the other one, but we are kind of almost losing detail over here, but it's not clipping, so that's really nice. I really like that you can still see the blue sky. You can still distinguish that it's blue over there. I'm not sure if it adds blue. It might add a magenta and raise the highlights a bit. It's pretty nice. I like this one too. It's same thing, kind of a bluish, greenish kind of thing. I noticed that a lot of film replications, emulators like Kodak and Fuji, at least the ones that I have used so far, have that kind of bluish, greenish in the midtones, which I really like. It looks vintage, like a lot of people like right now. And then if you add, let's see. So if you bring up the lift, and then you bring down the gain, and then bring down the midtones, you can kind of have that faded, desaturated look. I didn't really do it that well here, but that's kind of my idea. I like doing that because it has a little bit of a faded look to it, and I find that looks a little bit more filmic. And it's only with certain applications, not all the time. So now let's take a look at Kodak 2393. I think this looked almost the same as the other one. Let's go back to the key. And let's bring this down to 50, 55%. It looks almost the same again. So I'm kind of taking a look over here on the skin tones to see how they get affected. So I'll turn that off, turn that on, turn that off, turn that on. I'm kind of thinking, I'm not sure what the power was on that. I mean, the power is relatively the same, or how much gain I put in it. So I think that the 2393 has a little bit, like slightly more green to it, and it brings up the highlights a tiny, tiny bit more. Let's see if I'm backed by the waveforms. Yeah, I think it brings up the greens a little bit. I'm not too sure, but again, it's a really nice color. It's nice and saturated. There's a lot of contrast, and this is definitely something that I would use for something like this. Maybe something more narrative because the colors would speak more. The contrast would maybe mean that there's a contrast, something. But, just it's something to think about while you're shooting or even during post. We're going to go to the ground control LUTs. So these are some other LUTs that you can get for free. There's 3 of them. There's Saber, Rain, and Warm. I think Warm Honey. So we're first going to take a look at Saber. Okay, that wasn't that drastic, actually. I don't really like that. So it does look a little bit muddy right off the bat if you add these. I think what it's doing is bringing down the shadows, bringing up the highlights, and it might be bringing down the midtones, because you can see the midtones over here. They are getting pretty contrasty. And the highlights here, I think it almost brings down the total exposure. But let's turn it down and see what we can get at around 50-ish%. That's looking better. That doesn't look as muddy. You can tell over here that the background foliage doesn't look as muddy. It just adds a nice little layer of contrast. I actually really like this at 48.5%. It adds some nice color. It adds a tiny bit of saturation, a bit more contrast, but it keeps the colors looking... It makes the colors a little bit more dull, but I kind of like it for this shot. It kind of is adding a little bit of a... Let's see. Like a magenta? Like a bit of magenta maybe? If you look at the waveforms here, it's definitely stretching out the waveforms a bit over here. So it's giving it more contrast. And it's bringing down this red and bringing up the green. So red and green makes what? Red and green. So it's giving it a tiny bit of like orange, a bit of an orange look to it, and I think I like that. So GC Saber, Ground Control Saber, gives you a little bit of an orange. I actually didn't have this LUT before today, so I think I might add this to my LUTs. And yeah, 48.5% is pretty nice. So let's go on to GC Rain. Now this is something that I like doing. It's kind of hipstery, it's kind of Instagrammy, kind of visco cammy. Even at 100%, this does not look bad. Rain, it mutes the colors, it adds some magenta to the midtones. Definitely adds magenta. Green? Orange? What is that to the highlights? Someone tell me what that is to the highlights. A little bit of green, and it brings it down. So I think what it's doing, if I can equivalent it to the... if I can make it equivalent in curves, it is making the saturation at the extremes desaturated. So it's doing something like this to the extremes, because you can see here it's definitely bringing down the color and the tonality, the color in the shadows and the highlights, and it's kind of making the tonality compress a little bit, so there's not as much tonality in it, again, which I like. I really like a flat image that has a little bit of attitude to it. So bringing those colors in, bringing in the little bit of magenta, maybe orange, and muting the highlights and the shadows really makes it nice, and it helps. I would say if your subject is really separated from the background, or if there's a nice contrast between colors, then this would help give it more of a filmic vibe, as well as make your subject stand out more, because if they're in heavier contrast to their background, and then you put this LUT on, it's just going to make everything kind of blend together. Because I don't know if you can tell what I'm saying, but if you look at the background here, it all kind of pops. Then we put this LUT on, everything kind of just stops, and it's not really poppy. And now my vision is kind of going over here a little bit. So I'm seeing the subject more because of the contrast from the brownness of the tree and the pinkness of her shirt. And let's go to the last LUT we have, which is GC. Whoa. Look at the waveforms. We have a nice white balance here, and then bam! Red. Red, 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 red everywhere. Wow. Let's bring down the intensity of that. It's still too red for me. Still too red for me. Alright, at like 0%, it looks pretty nice. This just isn't my look. I would see this working well with a western, maybe a western theme, or maybe if everything else was a little bit not green, because this shot has a lot of greens, a lot of blues. It has really a lot of natural colors. It doesn't have that warm look to it. So I would see that this might enhance a warmer image at a lower, definitely at a way lower power than, or output opacity than 100. I would say maybe like 30% for this. And it kind of gives it that golden hour look. So you can kind of play this off as its golden hour. This was a little bit after golden hour. So this was about sunset at like 6:15. So this was maybe at like 6:30. So the sun was already down and everything was turning blue. That's why I had that. Because I forgot to change my white balance from daylight. But you know what, at 30% for this Warm Honey by Ground Control, it's not that bad. It actually looks kind of pleasing, maybe a little bit lower. And then maybe we can even bring the saturation down just so that the LUT gives it a little bit more. Or maybe let's bring the saturation down in the overall image and let the LUT take over the colors a little bit more. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. It looks a little bit more filmic, and it does give it a little bit of a warmer vibe to it. So it looks a little bit more inviting, looks a little bit more homey, and yeah, let's see what it... I'm just curious to see, put this back, what it does to the highlights. Because that's kind of what I'm looking for, because right now I really am interested in getting a camera that has nice highlight roll-off, so maybe the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro. I was kind of looking at the FS5, but I want ProRes. So this kind of doesn't mess with the highlights at all. Yeah, if you take a look at the blue, it actually might bring it down a bit. If you look at the blue vector, or the blue waveform right here, that goes, it might go down a bit, and then it brings the reds up and the greens up. It leaves the blues about where they are. It drops the blues a bit down here, especially in the shadows. But yeah, it's a nice look, gives an old-timey vibe. It could definitely work in a period piece, something like that. And if we play it here, you can see that, you know, nothing's really happening. But that doesn't look too bad. I might actually use that. And let's just go over it again one more time. So with this Fuji 3510, I really like the colors here. They're punchy, they're vintage, like a lot of people like. And then we'll go to 3513, looks about the same. It might bring the highlights up a little bit more. Kodak 2383, warmer vintage look. Kodak 2393, again, it might bring the highlights up a little bit. Actually, I think this one brings the highlights down a bit more than 2383. So I might use 2393 more than 2833. But again, if I want to, I can just bring down the gain, and then there it is. Let's go to Ground Control Saber. This one is a pretty nice one at, I think, full power I had it at. No, 50%. It makes the image a little bit muddier, but it makes it feel a little bit more natural, maybe? It makes it feel a little bit more like you're actually there. Because this, when it's not graded, when it's just corrected, it looks a little bit... It looks more filmic, I would say. But if you went to this... No, actually, that one looks more filmic. You see, I don't really know what I'm saying. Again, I'm not a colorist. I don't know the psychology behind all this, but I like how it looks. So let's go to Ground Control Rain. And again, I really like this one. It mutes the colors here. I might shift it a little bit to be less orange or magenta. But I really like that it mutes the highlights and mutes the shadows because it really helps. Oh, I actually don't like how it works on the dog though, on my dog. Oh yeah, if you look at my dog right here, you watch how it changes the highlights. It just brings it down because I guess her little head right here started clipping. It was too bright. And then this tries to bring it down and desaturate it, but it just looks a little bit unnatural. So that's definitely something to watch out when you're using GC Rain. Definitely do not clip your highlights because it's going to make it look very brown and muddy and messy. And it'll really expose where it clips. There's no highlight roll off there. And last one, we'll go to Ground Control Warm. That one is actually pretty nice now that I'm looking at it again. Nice and a warm kind of look to it. So, that's it for this first episode of Let's Play. Next episode, we're going to be looking at the small HD LUTs and maybe the LUTs. I really like LUTs. I'll have a link down below to all the LUTs I'm going to use in the future episodes, because first I'm using this page from Premium Beat, and all the LUTs are linked down below if you want to use any of them. This program is DaVinci Resolve. It's free, 12.5. You don't get some of the things like 3D LUT or burn-in or sizing, but you do get most of the things. Like I said in my other video, tracking and the masking are really good. So I think that's it for this episode. I'm gonna try to make longer videos like this for these let's plays, because it is a little bit more interesting than it's a little bit more nuanced than something like going over DaVinci Resolve. So until the next video, let's see if there's anything else I need to say. I think that's it. Okay, till next video. Later, guys. Thanks for watching the video. Watch this video, like it if you like, subscribe if you want more, and there's another episode of Let's Play coming up next week. I'm not sure what day I'm going to post them, but I'm going to try to do one every week so you can have a new LUT to use every week, and so I have the obligation to shoot something new every week. And that's it for this one for the second time. Later, guys.